Welcome to Ali Fitness Podcast, a weekly production all about bringing health into fitness. James Clear is an American author, entrepreneur, and photographer, and I believe he's also an impressive weightlifter. He definitely looks like he is. His writing is focused on how we can create better habits, make better decisions, and live better lives. He combines ideas from a wide range of disciplines, including biology, neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, and more. Today, I've invited him on to talk about how do we build habits, or perhaps even get rid of bad habits. And he writes about this in his new book, Atomic Habits, which I totally recommend. But firstly, James, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. It's good to talk to you.
So I'm intrigued to know, I know that you want to help people live their best lives, but I'm very intrigued to know why habits? Why did you sort of decide that habit forming was the secret to leading a better life?
Well, that's a good question. In a sense, they kind of found me as a topic. I wrote about a variety of different topics for the first 6 months or so that I started writing at jamesclear.com. And this was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So, sometimes I would write about health and fitness, sometimes I write about strength training or medicine, just kind of a variety of topics and ideas that I thought were interesting or useful for living a good life, productivity, creativity. But for whatever reason, the articles on habits seemed to do better than the others. And I also was getting feedback from readers that my thoughts on that topic in particular were more interesting. So I just started focusing there a little bit more. And as I dove into the research and wrote about the topic in more detail, I realized that habits are not everything. There are other like individual choices, which are not habitual, matter in life as well. But your habits really play a central role in your outcomes. I mean, in a lot of ways, so much of our conversation is about what kind of results can you get? What are my goals? What outcomes can I get? How can I get better results? But so many of your results are just a lagging indicator of the habits that preceded them. They're just kind of this natural outcome of the habits that you've been sticking to in recent months and years. So, your knowledge is often a lagging measure of your current reading and learning habits. Your bank account is a lagging measure of your recent financial habits. Your weight is a lagging measure of your recent eating habits. And so in many different ways, you kind of get what you repeat. And I started thinking about that idea more, diving into the science of how habits form and why the brain forms them. And then ultimately thinking about, are there any practical takeaways we can have here? Is there anything actionable, useful, interesting for daily life that we can use and apply? And ultimately, that led to the writing and creation of Atomic Habits and, the conversation that we're having now.
Very interesting. And I've heard you say, I believe that you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. What do you mean by that?
Well, this is coming from someone who's very goal-oriented. So, I set goals for all kinds of things in life. I used to set goals for the grades I wanted to get in school, or the weight I wanted to lift in the gym, or how much revenue I wanted my business to earn. And one day I kind of turned around and thought about it and looked back and realized sometimes I achieve those goals, but a lot of the time I don't. So clearly having the goal is not the thing that determines whether I'm making progress or not. And so I started to question, what is it that's actually moving the needle? And I came across this idea of systems versus goals. And that started to resonate with me a little more. And I thought more about the process and the habits that precede the goal or that come after setting a goal. And what you start to realize is that goals serve a purpose. They're useful. What they're good for is clarity and developing a sense of direction, figuring out where you want to focus your attention. But once you've done that, it's almost always more useful to spend all of your energy on the process and the habits and forget about the goal almost entirely. So, for example, one thing that I started to see was that a lot of the time winners and losers in a particular domain have the same goals. So if 100 people apply for a job, every candidate wants to get the job. They all have the goal of landing the job, but only one of them does. Or if 10 people are competing in the Olympics, they all have the goal of winning the gold medal. So the person at the top of the podium and the person who isn't even on it, same goal. But the difference in the outcomes is not determined by the goal. It's determined by the habits that they had in training and practice for the 4 years prior to the Olympics, or the habits of preparation and education that came before the interview. And so the habits are really the key thing to master. And that's why I use that phrase: you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. It's easy to want the gold medal. It's a very different thing to train like an Olympian.
So this is probably a bit of a difficult question to answer, but what percentage of our daily actions are actually habits?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Researchers have tried to track it. Depending on the study that you look at, it can be anywhere between 40 to 50% of your actions each day are habitual and more or less automatic or non-conscious. So, for example, things like tying your shoes or brushing your teeth or unplugging the toaster after each use. There are also, little body language things or conversational things, like you use the term awesome a lot and you don't even realize it, or you cover your mouth every time you laugh, or you apologize before you ask a question, like those kind of habits. So that, generally speaking, that kind of stuff takes up 40 to 50% of your daily behavior. But I think that the true impact of your habits is actually much greater than that. And the reason I say that is because your habits often determine how you spend the next chunk of time. So, for example, there's a moment each morning where I sit down at my computer and either I open up Evernote and I start writing my next article, or I go to ESPN and I check the latest sports news. And what happens in the next 45 minutes is really determined by what happens in those 45 seconds. Because if I go to ESPN, then I'll spend a half hour reading articles and looking at stuff. Whereas if I get started on the task of writing, then I stay focused. And there are a lot of things like that habits do, where they kind of they're like an entrance ramp to a highway. There's little action, just getting on the ramp doesn't take very much, but then all of a sudden you turn around 10 minutes later and you're speeding in one direction. And another one, a very common one, is pulling your phone out of your pocket. So you stand in line, you're waiting behind 5 people, and you're bored for 10 seconds, and so you pull your phone out of your pocket. Well, that habit only takes a second to do, but then you're either playing video games or checking email or browsing social media, and it feels like you have a choice. You do get to choose in that sense of what you're going to do on your phone, but the habit of taking your phone out has already constrained or determined how you're going to spend that next chunk of time to a certain degree. You're going to be doing something within the window of the phone. And there are all kinds of daily habits that are like that kind of determine the next chunk of time or set the amount of options that you have available to you. And so while only 40 to 50%, or half of your behavior is still a lot, but while only 40 to 50% is truly habitual, I would say upwards of 70, maybe even 90% is influenced by your habits.
That's an interesting way to look at it. And then what percentage of that is actually conscious habits?
Well, that's a really tough question to answer, and I don't have a specific number for that. But the reason is because you can sort of think of if you think about a behavior that you do once, that's on one end of the behavioral spectrum. Okay, it's a one-time action. And then let's say, for example, you go to basketball practice and you shoot a basketball and you shoot a free throw. All right. So the first time you do that, it's just an individual behavior. There's nothing about it that's habitual. You don't really know how to move your arms. You don't really know how to move your body to do it properly. The more that you repeat it, you kind of move down this spectrum. So after you've shot 10 free throws, you kind of understand it a little bit more. After you've done 100, now it's starting to get a little more fluent. After you've done 1,000, now maybe it's getting close to being automatic and habitual. And the more and more you repeat that, the further down that spectrum you slide. And at some point, and some people are like this, they're the people who hold the world record for most free throws in a row or something. They're basically just doing it on autopilot. They might not even remember a particular shot, their body's just moving naturally or automatically. And that level of muscle memory, that level of habit, it's going to take quite a while to get to that. But there's between those two extremes, shooting a free throw 100,000 times and shooting a free throw once, there's this gray zone. And in that gray zone, your brain has increased fluency and skill. You have improved your ability to do it without thinking. But that doesn't mean you're not thinking at all. Like, for example, if you were shooting your 1050th free throw and a bird came and landed on the basketball rim and you saw it, well, you wouldn't just like shoot automatically because it's a habit now. You would still notice that. So there's still some level of thinking and conscious thought that's going on. So I don't know if it's a question that anybody can put a specific number to, but as that fluency and skill increases, as the number of repetitions increase, as you practice it more and more, it does kind of more and more of the process seems to be relegated to the automatic non-conscious portion of the brain.
I've heard you talk a bit about that, the sort of automatic reaction. And a lot of people always ask whenever I talk to them about habits is like, how long will this take for it to become a habit, to actually form a habit? And I like how you sort of refer to this spectrum. And I've also heard you say, well, it doesn't actually really matter how long it takes. Can you explain that?
Well, a lot of the time you'll hear people ask that question, right? How long does it take to build a habit? And you'll hear questions like, or answers like 21 days, 30 days, 66 days is a very common one right now because there was one study that came out that showed that on average it took about 66 days to build a habit. But even within that study, the range was quite wide. It was like 3 weeks for something simple like drinking a glass of water, and it might be like 7 or 8 months for something more complicated like going for a run after work each day. But the point that I brought up is that honestly, it doesn't really matter how much time has elapsed. Habits do not form based on time elapsed. They form based on frequency and repetitions completed. So, think about, for example, how long did it take you to get in the habit of checking your smartphone when you first got it? I mean, most of us don't even think about that or remember it because we probably were checking our phone 100 times a day. And within a few days, it was already habitual. You didn't even really need to think about, has it been 21 days for me to build that habit? It's really, 30 days can pass and you can do something once, or you can do something 1,000 times. And it's really the frequency that instills the habit. But since saying that, and I do believe that's still true, that you need to put in the reps if you want to build the habit, I think there's even a deeper level or a deeper assumption behind that question. Often when people ask, how long does it take to build a habit? What they're really getting at is like, well, how long until I don't have to work that hard? Or how long until I don't need to put effort in anymore? And I think the honest answer to how long does it take to build a habit is forever. Because if you stop doing it, it's no longer a habit. And so in a sense, that answer kind of tells you what you really need to know, which is that habits are not a finish line to be crossed. They're a lifestyle to be lived. And so if you embrace that idea that this isn't a 30-day sprint or a 66-day sprint or whatever, this is a new lifestyle, then you start to see the importance of making small, sustainable changes that can become your new normal for the foreseeable future.
I love that analogy. And it's like you're not going on a diet, you're going on a lifestyle change.
Well, new goals don't really change lives. New lifestyles do. You need to be willing to embrace something that you're going to do daily or weekly or at least consistently. It needs to be a part of your future. And I think if you go in with that mindset, it becomes easier to choose a small sustainable habit, something that's non-threatening, something that can become your new normal or the standard in your life, because you see that this is something that's going to become part of your reality and not just something that you do on the way to getting a result.
Yeah. And so can you perhaps, you mentioned in your book the habit loop that Doohy refers to, the cue, craving, reward, and response. Can you perhaps take us through that and maybe even give us some examples? A lot of our listeners are fairly into health and looking at improving that. Perhaps a good example, and I know you know so much and you write a lot about fitness and health and nutrition. Can you give us an example of perhaps about how we would form one of these, I guess, good habits?
Sure. So first, let's talk about the habit loop. So as you mentioned, I like to divide a habit into 4 different stages: cue, craving, response, and reward. Some of this was popularized by Charles Duhigg's book, Power of Habit. His model was 3 steps: cue, routine, reward. And that model's a very behavioral psychology model. Tons of research behind it, really well backed. Basically shows that when there's some kind of cue that precedes a behavior, that's what kind of gets your attention, gets you going. And then when there's a reward that follows it, you have a reason to repeat it in the future. But I added that second stage of craving. And I did it for a very specific reason, which I'll explain in a second. So let's walk through each of those 4 steps. The cue is something that gets your attention. So, humans are very visual creatures. It's often a visual cue, like you walk into the kitchen and you see a plate of cookies on the counter. And that's a visual cue that sparks the habit of eating a cookie. But it could be any of the senses. So you could also have an ambulance driving behind you and you hear it. So that's an auditory cue to pull to the side of the road. Or you could have your phone buzz in your pocket, and that's a tactile cue to pull your phone out and check for a text message. So the cue is something that gets your attention. The second step, craving, which is the additional step that I added to this loop, is really important because it explains why different people have different habits or why they respond to the same cue in a different way. So, for example, you could have one person that walks into a room and sees a pack of cigarettes on a counter. And they're a smoker, so they see those cigarettes and they immediately get this craving, this urge to smoke. But somebody else could walk in and they see a pack of cigarettes and they've never smoked a day in their life. And so to them, it's just kind of a neutral cue. It's like, oh, there's a pack of cigarettes there, and they move on. They don't really assign any meaning to it. And that's really what the craving stage is about. It's about what the cues mean. It's about whether you predict that you would be better off to act on that or not. And this also helps explain why we have different habits at different times of the day or in different states. So, for example, you might walk into the kitchen in the morning and see a loaf of bread on the counter. And you see that cue and you think, oh, I need to eat breakfast. Let's make some toast. And so you put it in and you eat the toast. 20 minutes later, you walk back into the kitchen, and this time you see that same cue, the loaf of bread, but it means something different. You think, oh, I'm full. I'm not hungry anymore. I just ate breakfast, so there's no need to make any toast. And so, in other words, you're craving your prediction about what that cue means changes based on your current state. And that helps explain why you don't just automatically do the same thing every single time you see a cue. It's contingent on that prediction. And really, that prediction is what motivates you to take action or not. So the second step is craving. The third step is the response, which is the habit itself, the thing that you do. So reading one page, doing one push-up, writing one sentence. And then finally, there's the reward. And the reward is the outcome or the payoff for the habit. And all habits serve us in some way. So it's important to have some kind of reward so that you have a reason to come back to it again in the future. And this explains why people continue to repeat bad habits because, it's like, well, why would you smoke a cigarette if you know smoking is bad for you? Well, habits are often determined by the immediate reward, not the ultimate reward. So the immediate outcome of many bad habits is very favorable. Like if you eat a donut right now, it's sweet, it's sugary, it's enjoyable. The immediate outcome is great. It's the long-term outcome, if you repeat that habit for a month or a year, that is unfavorable. Meanwhile, good habits are often the reverse. The immediate outcome of going to the gym is you sweat, it's effortful, takes energy and sacrifice. The ultimate outcome, a month or a year from now, is favorable. And so this is why I like to say the cost of your good habits is in the present. The cost of your bad habits is in the future. But the brain is wired to make decisions based on what gets us an immediate reward. And so understanding that and figuring out ways to create more immediate rewards for the good habits and maybe layer on a little bit of immediate punishment for the bad ones, that's a really powerful strategy to use to get good habits to stick and bad habits to break. But that's a quick overview of cue, craving, response, and reward. And then I'll pause there for a second if you have any questions, and then we can talk about some examples.
Yeah, no, I'd love an example, and I'd also love for you to sort of explain how you might do that immediate reward to sort of keep you going.
Sure. So we'll do them both at the same time. So let's talk about a fitness example. So like going for a run. Okay, so there are a variety of simple things that you could do using cue, craving, response, and reward. So like, for cues, for example, you could set your running shoes and your running gear out the night before. People often do that. Some people even make it easier to run in the morning by actually wearing their running clothes to bed and then getting out of bed so that they're already dressed. You're just trying to find out ways to make it more obvious, more easy, and frictionless, convenient to do. But specifically with your question about how do we layer on an immediate reward? So let's say like the typical conversation is something like this. You're getting ready to go to bed and you think, all right, tomorrow's the day. I'm going to wake up and I'm going to go for a run. I'll get up at 6 and go run in the morning before I go to work. But then 6 a.m. rolls around and your bed is warm and it's cold outside and you feel tired. And so you're like, well, I'll just press the snooze button instead. And so in that case, the habit of procrastinating or of sleeping in has an immediate benefit, which is you get to stay warm and sleep more, whereas the habit of going for a run has an immediate cost. So what you need to do is to figure out a way to like change that calculation in your mind. So one strategy you can use is what's called a commitment device. And a commitment device is just a way to like lock in your future behavior. So let's say this time you do it again, and the day before you send a text message to a friend and you say, hey, can we meet at the park at 6:30 and go for a run? Well, now you have a running partner. So 6 a.m. rolls around. It's still cold outside. Your bed's still warm. You feel like sleeping in. But this time there's a cost because if you don't go to the park, you're a jerk and you leave your friend there all alone. And so you've kind of changed that calculation in your mind where now staying in bed bears an immediate cost and getting out of bed has an immediate benefit. And so it's not just about, oh, I need to go for a run because I need to get in shape so that my body looks different in 3 months. It's also about, I need to get out of bed this morning and go for a run so that I'm a good friend. And little strategies like that help kind of shift the balance so that you are getting an immediate reward that is also aligned with your long-term goal.
Awesome. That's a really good example. So in the case of, say, running, for example, let's say one of your goals or habits was that you wanted to start implementing this running routine, but you also know the importance of sleep. And so ideally, you'd set yourself up the night before so that you get enough sleep so that then you can do your run. But let's say, for example, on this particular night, maybe they've been running every day for a week and then they end up going to bed really late. So they wake up to their alarm, but they know they've only actually had 4 hours sleep. That's an important thing to take note of because obviously sleep's very important to them. And that's also another, I guess, say habit that they want to change. What would you suggest someone does in that case?
Yeah, it's a good question. Facing these trade-offs is something that happens a lot in life. And I just had it myself. I typically train 4 days a week, and I have 1 day of training in so far this week because I was traveling. And yesterday I had the opportunity to get a second day in, but I was exhausted from traveling the night before. And so instead of going to the gym, I just went to bed at 9 o'clock. And there's a certain level of self-awareness here that you need to have that is like, what does my body need? Does my body need a training session more tonight, or does it need a couple extra hours of sleep? And I decided that last night it needed sleep. Now, there's no way that anybody can tell you for sure, should you get out of bed and go for a run, or should you get the extra hours of sleep? That's a personal decision that you have to make. But I will say that generally speaking, I find that there are two strategies that are useful to keep in mind here. So the first is think about the overall identity that you're trying to cast a vote for, that you're trying to reinforce, and not the individual habit in that particular moment. So presumably, the reason that you care about going for a run and getting good sleep is because you care about reinforcing the identity of, I'm a healthy person, I'm a fit person, I have good self-care, I focus on making sure my body is in the optimal condition. And if you have more clarity around what that identity is that you're trying to build, it'll be easier to make that choice. And to give you another example of that, let's say that you're training for an ultra marathon. Well, in that case, like maybe it's more important to actually get up and have less sleep that day so that you can reinforce to yourself this is who I am. I'm an ultra marathoner. It's really important for me to train for this, even if the situation isn't ideal. Maybe I'll cut back my mileage today, but I need to get out of bed and at least do a short run so that when I'm 60 miles in on race day, I know that I had the preparation I needed to actually get this done. And that's an extreme example. Most people are not ultra marathoners, but it helps clarify why knowing that what identity you're trying to build can also help you make that decision. So identity is one piece. And then the second piece is, for lack of a better term, it's just like self-awareness. That question of like, what does my body need today? Or what do I need today? And the way that I've been able to manage some of those trade-offs, because I don't think anybody has a perfect answer to that, is with a phrase that I call reduce the scope, but stick to the schedule. So if you're faced with that trade-off where you're like, all right, am I going to get another couple hours of sleep or am I going to go for a run? Because I could go for a run after work, but I don't have that much time. I only have 20 minutes that I could do it then. Well, maybe you can do both then if you reduce the scope, but stick to the schedule. In other words, the most important thing is that you get a little bit of a run in today, even if it's not the full one, but you know that you need the sleep. So you decide, all right, I'm going to sleep in the morning and then I'm going to go for like a 15-minute run right after work. It's not the full thing. It's not as much as I wanted to do, but it still casts a vote for being a runner while giving my body what it needs. And that sounds like it's not going to do very much on any given day, but it can count for a lot in the long run, because what you're doing is you're still casting a vote for being that kind of person. You're reinforcing that desired identity. And so you can imagine, for example, your kids get sick and you have to stay home with them from school, or something is really crazy at work, or you're traveling and you've been on a plane for 6 hours and you get off and all you can do is 5 push-ups before you collapse on the bed. Well, it wasn't a great workout. It wasn't ideal. It's not going to transform your body overnight, but at least it casts a vote for being the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And in the long run, having that confidence, knowing that even on the bad days, I still get something done, that I think can help get you to come back again the next day.
I really like both those techniques, and especially the identity one, because, a lot of people, like you said, they're not actually out there to become an ultra marathon runner, but they do want to do the best for their, say, health and longevity. And so making that compromise and going, okay, well, I don't want to compromise on sleep because I know that in the long term isn't going to be the right thing, but then just getting that little run in later sort of is a good compromise. I really like that. So I guess it leads me to my next question, which is, how do you work out which habit to implement? So let's say, for example, you're like, okay, I really need to get healthy and fit and really change a lot of habits. So, for example, I need to start exercising. I need to start eating right. I need to start sleeping right. I need to do better in my relationships. So you almost feel overwhelmed because you've just got so many things and habits that you need to change. Have you got like a secret place to start?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think in the very beginning, if you are feeling overwhelmed, feel like you got a lot of things to change, the area to focus is on the keystone habit. And so a keystone habit is just a phrase for a habit that sort of pulls the rest of your life in line, or like naturally has a ripple effect into other areas. So for example, my keystone habit is exercise. If I go to the gym, then yes, I get the benefits of a workout and get stronger. But there are also a bunch of other things that happen that I wasn't trying to do in the beginning. So for example, I tend to sleep better at night because I'm tired from the workout. I eat better. I just kind of have this natural like feeling where like, oh, I don't want to waste it, so let me make sure I eat healthy too. I have this like post-workout high for an hour where I can think more clearly and focus well. Because I sleep after being tired from the workout, I tend to wake up the next day with better energy. And at no point was I trying to build better sleep habits or energy habits or focus habits or nutrition habits. They all just sort of came as this natural side effect of getting into the gym. Some other common keystone habits for performers and creatives, you often hear about some kind of like visualization technique. So like basketball players or comedians will visualize what the performance is going to go like before they step out onto stage or step onto the court. And if they get that habit in, then that feels like that kind of pulls the rest of their game or performance in line. CEOs will often talk about meditation as a key habit. They meditate for 10 minutes in the morning. They're able to handle the stress and responsibilities of their job better. Creatives and writers will often talk about daily walks as being a keystone habit. If they get outside and walk, even if it's just for 20 minutes, that can make a really big difference in the generation of ideas and thinking clearly through their problems and creations and so on. And then another one that I've heard about or seen in my research a fair bit is paying off debt. Interestingly, when people pay off debt, sometimes they also start eating better or going to the gym or things like that. And I think that you can figure out what the keystone habit is for you if you just sit down and ask yourself, what do I do when days go well? If I have a good day, what tends to be a part of that? And you'll probably come up with 2 or 3 options that could maybe be your keystone habit. And I would say if you're feeling overwhelmed or feel like you have a lot to do or a lot to focus on, just pick one of those and do that for the next month or 2 and see what happens. And if it doesn't work as well as you're hoping, then maybe you try the other keystone habit that you have on your list and see if that's the one that pulls the rest of your life in line. But that's a good way to limit it and not overwhelm yourself because you're only focusing on one habit while still getting some of these ancillary benefits in other areas.
I like that. So let's take the meditation keystone habit, for example. A lot of our listeners are sort of A-type, have no problem exercising, but when it comes to, say, implementing a meditation routine, it becomes a bit more difficult. And I know I've been there, and it's something that, you really need to plan and form a habit around. Are there any sort of techniques like habit stacking or anything else that you'd recommend? And I mean, how would you implement meditation, or how did you implement meditation in your life?
Yeah, your question where you said planning is important, I think that kind of gets at one of the answers here, which is that a lot of the time when we try to build a new habit, we don't know exactly when and where it's going to live in our lives. We don't have a very clear space for it to exist. And this is the role that implementation intentions or habit stacking, as you brought up, can play for building a habit. So an implementation intention, and there are hundreds of research studies on this that show how effective it can be, is really just a sentence that you fill out that says exactly when and where you're going to perform the behavior. So I will exercise on this day at this time in this place. And you can do it for almost anything. Implementation intentions can be used to increase the odds that people will stick to voting, recycling, getting a flu shot, quitting smoking, all kinds of things. But it's just a very specific plan. And what I noticed when I started to read some of that research and dig into the examples more is that a lot of the time people think they lack motivation when what they really lack is clarity. It's not that you need to get motivated to be a meditator. If you already kind of want to do it, then there is some urge there. You just need to make it as easy and as frictionless as possible to build that habit. So a couple things you can do from a tactical or strategic standpoint. First thing you can do is scale it down. Rather than worry about meditating for 15 minutes or 20 minutes, just meditate for 1 minute. And that sounds like, oh, what's that going to do? That's not going to give me a sense of zen or a sense of calm. And that might be true. It might not, but that's not the point in the beginning. The point is to become the type of person who sits down and meditates for 1 minute every day. If you can't be the person who meditates for 1 minute, then you don't have a chance to be the person who meditates for 15 or 20. You're really trying to figure out, like, how do I initiate that habit? And creating a habit stack can be one really effective way to do that. So a habit stack is simply when you take the new habit you're trying to build and you stack it on top of a current habit that you already have. So let's say that you make a cup of coffee every morning. You could say, all right, my habit stack is after I make my morning cup of coffee, I will meditate for 60 seconds. And that gives you a very clear and specific place for when that habit's going to occur. And it gives you a very memorable moment each morning where you sit down with this cup of coffee and now it's like, oh, it's time to meditate for a minute. And it's possible that that's not the right time. Like, for example, if you have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old and they're running around and 7 a.m. is a crazy time in your household, then that's not a good time to meditate. You'll need to pick a different habit stack at some other point in your day. But you're looking for a current habit that you have that provides the right space and opportunity for that new habit to live.
I like that. And I like the easy and frictionless. So another way to look at that then would be, I guess, let's take meditation, for example. To make it really easy, you, I guess, prepare maybe an app that you're going to use and download it and have it all ready to go, maybe even open on your front screen so that when you go to your phone, it reminds you it's there. It's easy to get to.
Yeah, that's a good example of how to use the digital space. You're basically just trying to prime the environment, right? So you talked about this is a way to prime your phone to make it easier to meditate. You download Headspace, you put it on the home screen, you can see it right there. You could also prime the physical environment. Like if you want to actually meditate like on a pillow, you could clear a space in a room and set a pillow right there. And now all you have to do is walk in and sit down. But as much as you can do that, and this is true for any habit, like if you're, people will often talk about nutrition, trying to eat healthy, chop up a bunch of fruits and vegetables over the weekend. And now suddenly it becomes easier to eat those things throughout the week because the environment's been primed to make that action easy. It takes less effort when you're in the middle of your work week. So those are all ways to prime the environment to make that habit easy. And whatever you can do to reduce friction or increase the convenience of the habit in the moment is going to help you follow through in the long run.
Absolutely. Running a health coaching business too, I find that just cleaning out the pantry and not having the food in the house really does set up the environment the right way. So I totally get that. So I guess up until now, we've discussed how to form habits. And I feel like forming a new habit, albeit it can be difficult, if you start easy and help yourself by stacking and that sort of thing and setting up the environment, it's very doable. But what I find hard, especially with a lot of clients as well, is getting rid of bad habits. And I know you explain in your book, well, it's basically the opposite. But can you take us through an example of getting rid of a bad habit? Because I find that it's actually more difficult, or is it just me?
Sure. So it does require different strategies or perhaps a different way of thinking. So with your good habits, you want to make the cues of them very obvious and available and visible. And as we just talked about, you want to make the action itself frictionless and convenient and easy. And you want to have some kind of immediate reward. With your bad habits, it's often the case that all of those things are already happening. Like take the habit of checking social media. Well, it's already obvious because your phone's always around you. It's already easy because your phone is like a millimeter from your skin. All you have to do is pull it out of your pocket. It's already rewarding because they have likes and notifications and whatever built in. So what you're trying to do is find ways to unwind those things or undo those things. So let's take the habit of watching television. A lot of people feel like they watch too much TV or spend too much time staring at a screen. But if you walk into pretty much any living room in America, where do all the couches and chairs face? They all face the TV. So it's what is that room designed to get you to do? And we often don't realize this about our bad habits, that our physical environment or social environment is nudging us kind of towards them. It's made the bad habit convenient and easy. If you drive, you have a 20-minute commute to work, odds are you're probably going to pass 10 fast food restaurants. How easy or convenient is it to eat fast food when you're surrounded by it? And so it becomes difficult, or essentially what you're trying to do is restructure the environment so that bad habit is not as convenient, not as easy. So, for example, if we go back to the TV habit, there are a variety of things you could do there. You could turn a chair so that it faces a coffee table with a book on it instead of television. You could put the TV inside a wall unit or a cabinet so that you're less likely to see it. You could increase the friction associated with watching TV. So you could unplug the TV after each use and then only plug it back in if you can say the name of the show that you want to watch. So you're not allowed to just mindlessly turn it on and find something. Or you could, if you want to be really extreme, take the TV off the wall, put it in the closet, and only take it out when you wanted to watch something bad enough to set it up again. I actually had one reader who she and her husband felt like they were watching too much sports, too many sporting games. And so they decided that they would get rid of their TV. And if they didn't want to watch a game bad enough to drive 15 minutes down the road and watch it at the sports bar, then they didn't actually want to watch it. And different environment design changes like that can change the odds that you're going to fall into a bad habit, right? So you restructure the environment so it's not so convenient. The other thing that you can do is reduce exposure. So I just talked about putting the TV behind a wall unit or cabinet doors or something, but you can do this in digital ways too. If you're trying to stick to a diet, Well, don't follow a bunch of food blogs on Instagram because you're constantly being prompted and cued to do the thing that you're trying to avoid. Or if you want to spend less money on electronics, don't follow YouTube unboxing videos or the latest tech review blog. Again, you're constantly being cued and prompted to do the thing that you're trying to avoid. And so whenever you can reduce exposure, unsubscribing from emails, unfollowing things on social media, taking a different route to work so that you don't pass fast food restaurants or you pass fewer of them, all of those things can increase the odds that you'll be able to curtail the bad habit and not feel pulled in that direction so constantly.
And what about substituting? So let's take, for example, someone, and this is a common theme, someone wants to stop, say, drinking sodas or drinking diet sodas. What could they do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are a couple steps you can do there. So one is you can actually use habit stacking to create a substitute. So in this case, you could say, all right, I'm allowed to drink a soda, but I have to drink a full glass of water first. So, it's not that I'm totally getting rid of it. I'm just trying to create some space. And habit stacking is really good for either adding a new habit into your life or creating space between you and the temptation to do a bad habit. So, when I see an elevator, I will walk up the stairs first. Or when I want to drink a glass of soda, I will drink a full glass of water first. Or when I want to make a purchase on Amazon, I will let it sit in the cart for 24 hours before buying it. And those little habit stacks, those simple kind of rules, allow you to have some space for the craving and temptation to pass before you actually fall into the habit itself. And sometimes, of course, that can be enough. Like you often find that you add something to the cart on Amazon and 24 hours later, you don't actually really even want it anymore. Same way with drinking a glass of water. What you really needed was just to have something to drink. And once your stomach was full, you don't have the urge to drink the Coke. So those are simple ways to create rules for substitution. In a more consistent way or repeatable way, you can also building a good habit and breaking a bad one sometimes is kind of like two sides of the same coin. And what I mean is that the space that a new good habit takes up, it can be taken from a bad habit that you're trying to break, but you don't even really need to think about the bad one. So let's say that right now your bad habit is you come home from work and you watch TV for 3 hours. Well, if you don't even think about the TV habit and you just say, you know what, I'm going to get home and I'm going to try to start a new routine of going to the gym. And you focus on building this gym routine, making that easy, making that your new normal. You get to the gym and you're there for an hour. Well, automatically that's an hour that you're not watching TV. So you're kind of simultaneously curtailing the bad one while you're building up the good one. And that's more of like an indirect form of substitution. But the reality is everybody only has 24 hours in a day. And so the more time that you spend building those good habits, the more you're going to be taking away from bad ones automatically.
I do like that idea of substituting for something that's good for you as well. So you're basically forming a good habit and losing your bad habit. I like that. So I guess, James, I wanted to ask you too about how much do you encourage like delving into, say, the psychology of it all? So I think it might have been Duhigg's book, I can't recall, where there was an example of he sort of hit 3:00 every afternoon and needed a donut or a cookie or whatever and sort of went to the cafeteria and found himself buying a cookie. And then continuously doing this, he realized, what is it that's actually making me do this? And he realized when he sort of analyzed it that it wasn't actually the satisfaction of eating the cookie, but what would happen would be he'd get up from his work and he'd go to the cafe, he'd buy the cookie and he'd sit down with some friends and actually catch up. And it was actually the catch up that he really enjoyed, not so much the cookie. So then once he realized that, he actually stopped buying the cookie. I think maybe he bought water instead and still got the catch up and still got that same, I guess, craving satisfaction reward met. Do you ever sort of encourage that sort of analysis to work out, well, why are you actually craving that?
Yeah, so that's Duhigg's example. I think that's his personal example. I think he had that habit himself,
I
included
think so.
in the book. And so this is one reason why I think it's important to have the second stage of craving in the habit loop, because the purpose of a reward it serves two purposes. The first purpose is that the reward satisfies the craving that came before the action. So in this case, the craving was for social interaction, and the reward of talking to people satisfies that craving. Now, it's harder to figure that out if you don't have this craving, if you don't know what the craving is. And so there's kind of and this is what Duhigg says as well, there's like this level of experimentation that comes with substituting a habit where you're like, well, I think I want one thing, but I actually want something else. And this is one of the challenges of building habits, and just one of the challenges of understanding ourselves and human psychology, is that sometimes it's hard to know what you actually are after, or we're a little blind to our own biases and desires. And so I think the only reasonable answer to this is a willingness to self-experiment, a willingness to try different things to see what works out. And that's ultimately how you can get to that answer. But I do think that there's usefulness in that. You know, your initial question was like, is it useful to think through the psychology here, or what's actually driving you? And I would say yes. You know, of course, like the deeper you can get into understanding your true motives and desires, into understanding what you're actually craving, the better positioned you'll be to substitute something that can resolve that. Yeah, so I guess that's my response there.
Look, I feel like I've picked your brain a lot, and I haven't even sort of touched upon all the awesome examples and everything that you give in your book. But is there anything else before I let you go that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I'll give one more strategy that I think could be useful. So if you're trying to think about where to start with building a good habit, I would say that you can utilize something that I call the 2-minute rule. And so the basic idea is you take whatever habit that you're trying to build and you scale it down to something that takes 2 minutes or less to do. So read 30 books a year becomes read 1 page, or do yoga 4 days a week becomes take out my yoga mat. And in many cases, this sounds like so small as to be silly, or maybe not even useful. Like, well, why am I taking out my yoga mat? That's not going to get me in shape. Like, I know the real habit is to actually do the workout. But this is a really crucial insight about building better habits, which is that a habit must be established before it can be improved. You need to make it the standard in your life, make it the normal thing to do. And then you can worry about upgrading and expanding it from there. And if you can master the art of showing up, even if it's just in a really small way, then you position yourself to actually build and expand and improve upon that habit for the future. But you got to find a way to make it the normal thing in your life, even if it's just for 1 minute. And so I would suggest using that 2-minute rule as a general guideline for how small should my habit be? How can I scale this down and make it the new normal in my life? And then once you do that, you have a lot of options for improving from there.
I love that. And it's so true because, you know, the example you've given before with going to the gym, just go into the gym for 2 minutes and then leave. It's like, well, I'm here now. I may as well do it. And so you end up just doing a workout because you're here anyway. And it's so true. It's establishing the habit that's the first step. And it's funny because I feel like we live in a society now where it's all or nothing. So I'm going to start doing yoga 7 days a week. Or not at all?
For some reason, we really get into this all or nothing mentality with habits. This is particularly true with diets, where people are like, either I do the diet perfectly or why bother? And I'm not entirely sure why we tend to be that way, but the mantra, the philosophy that I've tried to use or that has been helpful for me when dealing with that is never miss twice. You know, so you stick to a diet, you're doing it well for 4 or 5 days, and then your friends want to go to happy hour or you binge eat a pizza or something, and you're like, I wish I hadn't done that, but never miss twice. So let me make sure that the next meal is a healthy one. Or when I was writing new articles every Monday and Thursday, if I missed on a Thursday, well, I wish I hadn't done that, but never miss twice. So let me make sure I'm back in there on Monday. And this is a truth about pretty much any habit, which is that it's almost never the first mistake that ruins you. It's like the spiral of repeated mistakes that follows. And so if you can get back on track as quickly as possible, you turn around at the end of the year and that one miss or those few slip ups are just a blip on the radar. It doesn't really mean much, but that's only true if you never miss twice. And so I think that that's kind of a useful way to balance this all or nothing mentality that we tend to slide into.
Yeah, funny you mentioned that. I actually read that in your book and it sort of discouraged me a bit. I felt like adding to that and saying never miss twice. And if you do, start again straight away. Because I feel like if someone does miss twice, then they may just give up. And so I
even more all or nothing.
Exactly. So I sort of wanted to add to that and go, well, and if you do, start again, because you've still got that flow to like that muscle memory is still there.
Yeah. Whatever you need to do to get back on track. The core idea here is that you need to start a new streak as soon as you can, rather than letting the fact that the old streak broke or that you weren't perfect derail you and take you off course.
And it's funny now too, all those apps are coming out with the streak, and it's like, oh, you've broken your streak if you miss a day. And I guess it depends on what sort of person you are, but that can obviously encourage you to keep going or discourage you if you do break it. But once again, it's that all or nothing. It's like, just get back on track and take small chunks rather than trying to do everything in one day.
Agree.
Excellent. Look, James, I really appreciate your time, and I have to ask you a bit of a personal question before I let you go, and that is, do you have a tattoo?
I do not.
Okay. I wondered because I know you've got a great physique with all that weightlifting, and I didn't know if under that shirt you might have had a hidden tattoo.
No, who knows? Maybe in the future.
Is it something that you've ever considered?
When I was in college, I played on a baseball team, and we always said that if we won a championship, we were going to get a tattoo to commemorate the season, because the school had never won one before. And we ended up making the championship game, but lost. So I came very close, but did not ultimately get one.
So basically, you're telling me you don't have a tattoo because you're a loser.
There you go.
Or not. Excellent, James. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you.
For all the resources and show notes from today's episode, please go to www.ali.fitness. If you liked today's episode, please show your appreciation by going to iTunes, give us a 5-star review and subscribe.